We've all seen it, right? The massive queues, websites that just keep crashing, and black market prices for gas cylinders that are just out of control. India is in the middle of a huge LPG shortage. But what's really going on behind the official statements? Let's get into it.
To really get what this crisis means, we have to start right here, in Punjab, with a man named Bhushan Kumar Mittal. He was 66 years old, and he spent hours standing in the sun just waiting in line for a single gas cylinder. But he never made it home. He passed away right there in that queue. His story, it's not just some tragic headline, it's the human face of a problem affecting the entire country.
But here's where the story takes a really sharp turn. The day before Mr. Mittal died, just one day before, India's petroleum minister stood up in parliament and said this, that the supply was fully protected and there was no shortage. So, how do we square that official statement with the reality that people like Mr. Mittal were facing?
Okay, so first up, let's just try to unpack this massive disconnect between the official story and what was actually happening on the ground.
I mean, the reality on the ground, it was impossible to miss. From Delhi to Pune to Noida, people were lining up for hours. If you tried to book online, good luck. The systems were constantly crashing. The economic hit was fast and hard. Up to 30% of restaurants in big cities just had to close their doors. Food delivery orders, they tanked by 60%. And then there was the black market. A cylinder that should cost about 900 rupees was suddenly going for 3, 5, even 6,000 rupees. It got so desperate that people started stealing and even looting cylinders.
But you know what's really telling? The government's own actions seem to completely contradict their no-shortage story. I mean, if everything was fine, why suddenly hike cylinder prices? Why order all the refineries to max out their production? And the biggest giveaway? Why start rationing? They started capping how much restaurants could buy and stretched the waiting time between cylinder bookings to 25 days in cities and 45 days in villages. These are not the actions of a government that has things under control. It looks a lot more like a government scrambling to manage a crisis they're denying exists.
So, how did we even get here? To figure that out, we need to zoom out, way out, beyond India's borders, because this whole thing was kicked off by an event thousands of kilometers away.
First things first, you have to get your head around just how much we rely on other countries for our cooking gas. This chart says it all. A massive 60% of the LPG we use in India is imported. Think about it like this. For every 10 meals you cook with gas, 6 of them depend on a cylinder that came from a ship. That right there is a huge vulnerability for our country.
Okay, now here's where that vulnerability gets really, really risky. Of all that gas we import, a staggering 90% of it passes through one single narrow shipping lane, the Strait of Hormuz. It's a tiny 33-kilometer wide choke point that, for all practical purposes, holds the key to India's kitchens.
And then, boom, the trigger was pulled. The conflict between the US and Iran escalated, and Iran shut down the Strait of Hormuz. Just like that, 90% of India's LPG import route was gone. The main tap was just turned off.
But you know, blaming a conflict thousands of miles away is just too easy. Sure, the trigger was geopolitical, but this crisis has exposed a much deeper problem right here at home. And that problem is a massive failure of planning.
Look, for anyone paying attention to geopolitics, the tensions in the Middle East were not exactly a secret. It was pretty obvious for months that a conflict could break out and that the Strait of Hormuz was at risk. So that begs the really big question. Why wasn't a backup plan in place? Why weren't we securing other supply lines just in case?
And the answer to that question reveals what might be the single most shocking failure in all of this. Unlike so many other countries that keep months' worth of fuel stored away for emergencies, India has no strategic reserve for LPG. None. There is no emergency stockpile we can tap into when our main supply gets cut off.
This number, it's just terrifying. The total storage capacity we have in the entire country, that's all the gas in the whole supply chain, adds up to less than 2 days' worth of what we actually use. Let that sink in for a second. For a country of 1.4 billion people, our buffer is basically zero. The whole system runs on ships arriving just in time.
So when you piece it all together, the picture becomes painfully clear. This wasn't just some random bit of bad luck. This was a crisis born from a whole series of systemic failures, depending almost completely on one tiny choke point, failing to build any kind of emergency reserve, and having no real backup plan ready to go. And the slow, confusing response from the top only made a bad situation a whole lot worse.
Okay, so where does that leave us now?
And more importantly, what can you actually do to get through this shortage?
Let's be real here. Yes, emergency supplies are being brought in from other countries, but it's a drop in the ocean compared to what we need every single day. And negotiating safe passage for ships is a slow, one-by-one process. The expert consensus? We're probably looking at another 4 to 8 weeks of this, and honestly, that might be optimistic.
So what can you do? Well, first, if you've got reliable electricity, an induction cooker is your best friend right now. There's a reason their sales have gone through the roof. Second, if piped natural gas, or PNG, is an option where you live, get registered. It's not dependent on the Strait of Hormuz. Third, if you see someone selling cylinders on the black market, report them. It's a crime, and it makes the situation worse for everyone. And finally, and this is a big one, please try to avoid panic buying. Hoarding extra cylinders just makes the lines longer and the shortage more severe for your neighbors.
But we have to be honest here. These solutions, they're not for everyone. An induction cooker is pretty much useless in places with spotty electricity, which is true for a huge part of rural India, and piped gas is mostly an urban luxury. For millions and millions of people, these options just aren't on the table.
And that really brings us to the most heartbreaking part of this entire mess. For years, there was so much progress, with government schemes helping millions of women switch from smoky, unhealthy mud stoves to clean LPG. And now, this crisis has thrown so many of them right back to where they started. The woman who thought her family was finally free from breathing in that smoke is lighting that same mud stove again. They're the ones paying the highest price for a crisis that really could have and should have been prevented. The real question now is, will we actually learn our lesson from this? Or are we all just destined to be standing in line all over again?